Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to hear the story of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is a story about love, misunderstandings, pride, social class, and personal growth. The story begins in an English town called Meryton. A very wealthy and eligible bachelor named Mr. Charles Bingley moves into a large estate nearby called Netherfield. Living close to Netherfield, at a place called Longbourn, are Mr. and Mrs. Bennet and their 5 unmarried daughters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, Catherine, and Lydia. When Mrs. Bennet hears that a rich, unmarried man has come to live nearby, she becomes extremely excited. As a longtime resident of the area, her first thought is how she can arrange a marriage between Mr. Bingley and one of her daughters. Her excitement is understandable. In early 19th century England, middle-class women like the Bennet sisters were not allowed to inherit money or property. Because of this, a good marriage was often their only chance for financial security and a stable future. The opportunity to meet Mr. Bingley comes at a local ball. Mr. Bingley is friendly, cheerful, and well-mannered. He dances with Jane Bennet, and it is clear that he admires her greatly. He also encourages his close friend, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy, to dance. However, Darcy refuses. Instead, he makes rude and insulting comments about several women at the ball, including Elizabeth Bennet. Elizabeth overhears Darcy saying that she is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and that he is not in the mood to give attention to young ladies who have been ignored by other men. Even though Darcy is extremely wealthy, his cold and arrogant behavior causes the people of the town to see him as proud and unpleasant. Meanwhile, Jane begins to develop feelings for Mr. Bingley, and Elizabeth supports and encourages her sister. Soon after, Jane visits Mr. Bingley's estate at Netherfield, but during her stay, she becomes ill. Elizabeth goes there to take care of her and stays for several days. During this time, Mr. Darcy starts to notice Elizabeth's intelligence, honesty, and sharp sense of humor. This growing interest annoys Miss Caroline Bingley, Mr. Bingley's sister, who has her own plans and hopes of attracting Darcy herself. On one occasion, Darcy admits to Elizabeth that he has a quick temper and finds it difficult to forgive people. Elizabeth replies that his biggest fault is that he tends to hate everyone. Darcy smiles and answers that her fault is that she deliberately misunderstands people. While Jane is recovering, Mrs. Bennet visits Netherfield and embarrasses Elizabeth with her poor manners and lack of social grace. Eventually, when the Bennet sisters return home, Darcy feels relieved because he realizes that Elizabeth has begun to attract him more than he wishes. At the same time, Miss Bingley behaves rudely toward Elizabeth and teases Darcy about his interest in her. Soon after this, the Bennet family receives an unexpected visitor, Mr. Collins, who is Mr. Bennet's cousin and the future heir to the Bennet estate. Mr. Collins is foolish, self-important, and overly flattering. He plans to marry one of the Bennet daughters so that the estate will remain within the family. Meanwhile, Elizabeth becomes friendly with Mr. George Wickham, a charming militia officer. Wickham tells her that he has a troubled and painful history with Darcy. His story makes Darcy appear cruel and unfair, which further damages Elizabeth's opinion of him. At another ball held at Netherfield, Darcy asks Elizabeth to dance. During the dance, there is an uncomfortable and tense conversation about Wickham. Elizabeth's family continues to behave awkwardly and embarrass her, making her question their social standing even more. Not long after this event, Mr. Collins proposes marriage to Elizabeth. She firmly refuses him. Mrs. Bennet is furious, but Mr. Bennet supports Elizabeth's decision. The peace of the Bennet household is broken again when Jane receives a letter from Caroline Bingley. The letter reveals that the Bingley family has left Netherfield. Caroline hints that Mr. Bingley may soon form a connection with Darcy's sister, Georgiana. Jane is heartbroken and travels to London, hoping to see Mr. Bingley. However, Caroline treats her coldly and Mr. Bingley is nowhere to be found. Jane begins to suspect that something is wrong. Elizabeth later travels to London as well and visits her friend Charlotte Lucas, who is now married to Mr. Collins. During her stay, Elizabeth is invited to dine at the estate of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Mr. Collins's patroness, and Mr. Darcy's aunt. Lady Catherine lectures Charlotte about managing her household and then turns her attention to Elizabeth. She asks intrusive questions about Elizabeth's family, property, and upbringing. She criticizes the Bennets for educating their daughters at home and for not focusing enough on music and accomplishments. Lady Catherine is surprised when Elizabeth responds confidently and honestly, defending herself and her family. Soon, Lady Catherine's nephews arrive, Mr. Darcy, her favorite, and his cousin, Colonel Fitzwilliam. Elizabeth gets along very well with Colonel Fitzwilliam, who is kind and easygoing. Darcy, as usual, remains reserved and difficult to read. During walks around Rosings, Elizabeth frequently encounters Darcy, who asks questions about Charlotte and the neighborhood. Elizabeth begins to suspect that Darcy is trying to match her with Colonel Fitzwilliam. During one walk, Colonel Fitzwilliam mentions that Darcy once interfered to prevent a friend from making an unsuitable marriage. Elizabeth realizes that he is talking about Darcy, separating Jane and Bingley. This realization makes her extremely angry. Soon after, Darcy surprises Elizabeth by proposing to her. He confesses his deep love, but does so in a proud and intimidating manner. He speaks of struggling against his feelings and mentions her family's lower status as an obstacle. Although his words show strong emotion, they only offend Elizabeth further. She passionately rejects him, blaming him for Jane's unhappiness and for his cruel treatment of Wickham. In response, Darcy writes Elizabeth a letter explaining his actions. He says he believed Jane did not love Bingley as deeply as Bingley loved her, though he admits he may have been wrong. He also reveals the truth about Wickham, that Wickham wasted the money Darcy gave him and even tried to run away with Darcy's sister for her fortune. This letter forces Elizabeth to reflect on her own judgments and recognize her mistakes. Later, Elizabeth travels with her aunt and uncle, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, and they visit Pemberley, Darcy's grand estate. They are welcomed by the housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, who is warm and kind. She speaks highly of Darcy, describing him as an excellent and generous master. Elizabeth is surprised by this praise and begins to see Darcy in a new light. While touring the estate, Darcy unexpectedly arrives. Elizabeth feels embarrassed, but Darcy behaves politely and respectfully. He charms the Gardiners and even invites Mr. Gardiner to fish in his streams. Elizabeth quietly wonders if Darcy still has feelings for her. The next day, Darcy visits again, this time with his sister Georgiana and Mr. Bingley. Georgiana is shy and gentle, very different from Elizabeth's expectations. Bingley is clearly pleased to see Elizabeth and asks questions that make her suspect he still loves Jane. Darcy and Georgiana invite Elizabeth and the Gardiners to dinner at Pemberley, which she accepts. Elizabeth is deeply impressed by Darcy's changed behavior and begins to admire his true character. Soon after, Elizabeth receives 2 shocking letters from Jane. The first reveals that Lydia has run away with Wickham, supposedly to get married in Scotland. The second letter brings worse news. Wickham has no intention of marrying Lydia. Elizabeth is overwhelmed with distress. She confides in Darcy, who listens quietly. The town soon buzzes with news of Wickham's heavy debts. Mr. Bennet and Mr. Gardiner search for Lydia and Wickham in London, but find no trace of them. Eventually, Mr. Gardiner writes that Lydia and Wickham have been found, though they are not yet married. Wickham demands money in exchange for the marriage. To save Lydia's reputation, the family agrees. Later, Lydia accidentally reveals that Darcy attended her wedding. Curious, Elizabeth writes to Mrs. Gardiner and learns the truth. Darcy had gone to London, tracked down Wickham, paid his debts, and arranged the marriage, insisting that Mr. Gardiner take all the credit. Elizabeth feels deeply grateful. Soon after, Mr. Bingley returns and proposes to Jane, who happily accepts. It becomes clear that Caroline Bingley had tried to keep them apart. Lady Catherine then visits Elizabeth and demands that she promise never to marry Darcy. Elizabeth refuses, asserting her independence. A few days later, Darcy returns with Bingley. During a walk, Darcy and Elizabeth are left alone. Darcy proposes again, this time with humility and respect. Elizabeth accepts, having grown to love him. Darcy thanks Elizabeth for teaching him the lesson of humility, and Elizabeth apologizes for her earlier harsh judgments. 1 year later, Jane and Bingley settle near Pemberley. The families remain close. Even Lady Catherine eventually accepts the marriage. And so the story ends with understanding, love, and happiness, showing how pride and prejudice can be overcome. For more stories like this, stay connected with the channel.